Hello and welcome to our podcast, Conversations with Elders. My name is Makgathi Mokwena, Pilgrim in Heels, and I am so very happy this particular episode to be welcoming a dear friend of mine, Lucille Greeff. Before I welcome Lucille properly, I'd like to acknowledge and give gratitude to Aephoria Partners for supporting this podcast and really give a little bit of a background as to why we are holding these conversations with elders. And the main one is, it comes from the immense challenge and invitation provided us by COVID-19. We recognize that in some way we have to do things differently. And so I am having conversations with people that are elders. And by elders, I mean those individuals in our communities who hold a bigger perspective, maybe some insight, some wisdom that can help us widen our own perspective and therefore develop some understanding on matters that we struggle to understand and perhaps that confound us. Essentially, it's about how can we do better as humans using a whole variety of tools that are available to us. And so this afternoon, I am welcoming Lucille, and Lucille is one of the partners at Aephoria Partners, and we are going to be speaking about the Enneagram, a tool that we use, a tool that is actually one of the cornerstones of our work. Lucille, welcome.
Thank you so much, Makgathi, and I'm feeling deeply humbled by being in some way included in your podcast series, and I know that I'm still an elder in training as opposed to an elder. So yeah, it's lovely to be speaking to you today about an essential part of the work, as you say, that you and I often do together. So thanks for this invitation.
You're very, very welcome. Before we go deeper into our conversation, I'd like for us to just take a brief moment to take a breath, really a breath that will assist us to just land in this field, in this conversation, calling whoever emissaries, guides, helpers, wisdom holders who walk with us to come forward to guide this conversation. Thank you. Now, I want to say something about Lucille, and then I'm going to give over to you to introduce yourself even further. And I have to say that Lucille is a decade younger twin of mine. And I use the word twin very, very directly because she and I have an intertwined relationship that is quite interesting. I think when we first met, we recognized each other. And from that recognition, we saw that there are many different experiences, many different paths that we have walked in parallel with each other. And through conversations, through interaction, you realize, oh, there's another one. Oh, there's something else that affirms our twinship. Yeah, so it's so good to have you and to see you in red.
Thank you, Makgathi. And yes, as you say, from this moment of recognition between the two of us, some really beautiful work that we do together with leaders, with teams, with individuals who are on this journey of growing and expanding and maturing, not just who we are, but also what we're able to meet in the world and what we're able to see and respond to in the world in so many different ways. Yeah. So, yeah, Shall we just start? And maybe I can start by giving a short overview of what the Enneagram is for those people who are watching or listening to this that are unfamiliar with it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes, I'd love that. Please go ahead.
Brilliant.
What is the Enneagram? Yeah.
So thanks. The Enneagram is really an ancient wisdom tool that is both a map and a mirror that speaks to who we are, but also the process of growing, maturing, some would say even returning to God, that helps us make sense of who we are and how we grow and develop in this world. So the word Enneagram is a Greek word that means the model or the map of 9. And in its most commonly known form in modern times, it's used to help us understand our deeper motivations. It kind of holds 9 archetypes. And each archetype represents a story we have around how we'll get the love that we need to survive in the world. And we have these stories, these deeper motivations or operating systems that propel us to move towards some things and avoid some other things. And I love the way in which the Enneagram holds each of these 9 spaces as archetypes, rather than as, you know, a set of characteristics or a loose set of thoughts, feelings, and actions in some way. It's really an integrated archetype. And it's from that point of each representing an archetype that it can also help us to grow and develop vertically or mature through our lives.
I absolutely love how you described it as a map and a mirror, and also the archetype aspect of it. But I want to start first with a map and mirror part, because with it, I mean, I'm imagining a person sort of having a meta perspective on the larger landscape, looking at something as a map. And getting a bigger understanding, but then there's a mirror that it comes right close into one's face, so that you can then have a close up look at understanding who you are.
Absolutely. There's really, when working with the Enneagram, and when we first come to know it, often the first encounter with the Enneagram is that of the mirror. So this is where the archetype of the Enneagram, and it's one of the nine points on the Enneagram, speaks to the operating system that I have taken on to get the love that I need. And when I look into the mirror in this way, often it's one of those beauty mirrors, you know, that actually shows everything you don't want to see up close and personal. I'm quite scared of those mirrors myself. But when you look into the mirror of the Enneagram in that way, it shows us a lot of the unconscious patterns, a lot of the ego stuff that drives our behavior, some of the quite humorous and quite sad ways in which we've contracted into ourselves. We've made ourselves smaller than we actually are in our full potential. And so then once we've looked in this mirror and we've come to kind of scrub the basement a bit and figure out what is this unconscious story that I have that drives a lot of my behavior and thoughts and feelings in the world, the next kind of part of my relationship with the Enneagram is often as a map. And you know those maps when you go hiking or when you're in the mall even, that has the little red X that says you are here now? So my main Enneagram style is a little bit like the you are here now. And then the rest of the Enneagram is the map that shows me the way, the path of my development, the path of growth, the options that are there for me, from the perspective of the wings or the next door neighbors that are really adaptive mechanisms that can help me cope better with everyday life, to the pathway of the lines, which is quite radical and transformative and can be a little bit of a canary in a coal mine, can show me when I'm falling down into or falling back into less mature behaviors and responses, but can also show me the way and the pathway to radical growth and those paradigm shifts that we speak of in our vertical development work, where I'm at a higher altitude and able to look at the world in a different way. And there are many other ways in which we can also work with the Enneagram. It's not the only metaphors, but definitely two of the most powerful ones for me.
Right, right. So in that way, assist with making these unconscious patterns more conscious and make them even more useful, so that I'm not at the mercy of material that's unconscious to me, but that I can start using it to carve out a path that assists me to grow and develop.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm a big believer in the story that what we cannot see in ourselves, we cannot respond to in the world, or at least not effectively or maturely. So if the more I discover myself and who I am, the bigger the world out there actually becomes for me. So the inner and outer journeys are so beautifully intertwined. So if I can see my own anxiety and what activates it, then I can respond to the anxiety in the world, just as one of the things that there's quite a lot of at the moment when we look at the COVID-19 pandemic. And so that's why it's useful to look in a mirror. And the more we look, the more we find. And that's what I also love about the Enneagram. This is not a once-off tool. I mean, I've been walking a road now with the Enneagram for more than 15 years, it feels like. And I still keep discovering new things about myself when I look into this mirror. So it's something that can be a long time companion for us, rather than a once-off look and now I've got it, let's keep going.
Yes, if only life was as simple as that. Yeah. You spoke about the 9 types, the 9 pathways, and one of the frameworks is one of the pathways to God. Can you speak a little bit about what these 9 types are?
Yes, so just very briefly, these 9 types, as I said, each represents an archetype that is a part of the human condition. And so even before I describe the 9 archetypes, I'd love to invite and just call on the law of one, or the principle of one, or the principle of the circle in the Enneagram, which says that the full human condition, the full circle, the story of wholeness is all 9 of these together. And part of what happens for us is that we split off into just a part of the whole, and we need to walk our lives as a way of reclaiming our fullness and our wholeness. So keep that in mind as I describe this, because different people respond differently to these archetypes, and some people would say, I'm all of them, and some would say, I'm none of them, and some people immediately find a home base. So people respond to it differently, but and all of that is useful in many ways.
Yeah.
So each of the Enneagram styles can be known by many different names, but what they have in common across different teachings is really the essence of each of the numbers. So I'll mostly refer to the numbers here to make it translatable across different frameworks. So Enneagram 1 is this archetype that tries to really, really be a good, responsible person that lives the good, responsible, and in some way maybe the mistake-free life. So my belief is that I will get the love that I need by being responsible and avoiding doing bad or wrong things. And that can then set me off on a path where, as you can think immediately, I take a lot of responsibility. And also I'm really sensitive to this idea of things falling apart, as Chanoa Achebe and Pema Chodron both speak and write about. So the moment I'm going to relax, I will be part of what causes the badness, the things falling apart. So I'm just going to keep going and be this super responsible, hardworking person. And I'm going to pay attention to the details because, as we know, and I mean this quite literally, the devil is in the details. If we then move to Enneagram 2, this is the archetype that believes that my way to get the love I need is by being there for other people, by being helpful, by being focused on them. Because if I'm too focused on myself, I'll become selfish, and selfish people don't deserve love. So here my energy is constantly scanning the people around me for how I can win them over by doing things for them, either physically or through advice or through supporting. But I'm really attuned to their needs and quite out of tune with my own, which can lead to self-neglect and deep exhaustion. Enneagram 3, this is the archetype that says there are two kinds of people in the world, winners and losers. I am a winner. I'm going to be successful. Look at me not failing. So in some way, I've come to believe that I will be lovable if I show the world, to the world, that I'm valuable, that I add value, that I can do things. So often very hardworking, very much focus on making a valuable contribution, proving my value through what I do. But what I'm very sensitive to is any story on the outside where the world reflects back that I'm not valuable, that I've made a mistake, that I've failed, that I'm a loser in some kind of way. So I'm going to keep climbing, and I'm looking externally as well for this validation that says, well done, you know, you're great, you're climbing the ladder, you're winning. It's often a very competitive type in that way, because in order for me to win, obviously some other people need to lose, whether it's arguments or achievement in some kind of way. The Enneagram 4, which is the point where, you know, both you and I reside, and part of this connection that we have between us. The Enneagram 4 point really relates to the archetype that feels that it's very easy to lose myself. Very easy to, in some way, get out of relationship with my true, authentic self. And so this leads to this deep feeling that I need to constantly be finding myself, reclaiming myself, expressing my authentic self. And we often know through our feelings that we're doing this or not. And a very big sensitivity to this, the sense that something's missing, and maybe even something's missing that other people seem to have. And so I'm looking for this missing piece that I can reclaim. That's generally a very feeling-oriented type. I sometimes joke and say this is the I feel, therefore I am part of the Enneagram. And also a part where there's sometimes this feeling that in order for me to find my authentic self, I have to go through suffering. And so in some way, more of a trust of suffering sometimes, or letting go or giving up, than there is for the joyful and the happy, and some attachment to that suffering that can get us into trouble. Enneagram 5 is the archetype that says the world is exhausting. If you don't watch your resources, if you get too plugged into the world and into people and into networks, you will end up depleted with your tank completely empty. And when your tank is empty, you won't be able to think. So this is a space where I try to preserve resources, primarily in order for me to be able to invest them in my thinking, my sense making. It's a very head-based type, often a very private type. And my deep fear is the sense that I will run out of energy and depletion, and then I won't be able to make sense of any of it. And people often feel overwhelming, like they're intruding or in some way taking resources, energy, time, insight, whatever it is. And so I need to protect myself against the world. And it's often associated with the metaphor of the castle. So this idea that I need to protect and have my drawbridge up, because, you know, otherwise the mob will come in, and before you know it, the castle will be broken down. That's kind of a worst case scenario. The Enneagram 6, this is the point on the Enneagram that I think many of us can deeply relate to at the moment, given the amount of uncertainty in the world that the COVID-19 pandemic has brought about. And this is the point where we say the world's a scary place. If you let your guard down, if you go out without your mask, or if you don't stockpile toilet paper, bad things will happen. So you better be vigilant. You better be careful about what you do, but also who you trust. And the Enneagram 6 archetype has this deep relationship with trying to create certainty and find trust in the world, but also this deep cynical belief that it's really hard to do that and people will let me down inevitably. So this is a space where I'm constantly trying to make sure that good things happen by scanning for all the bad things that can keep that from happening, and trying to put in place preventative strategies and measures to protect me from all the bad consequences that might come from that. So deep relationship with anxiety, that's part of the Enneagram 6 space. And, you know, I'm sure lots of people listening to this are already thinking about the many ways in which vigilance and wearing masks and being prepared and sanitizing and social distancing and in many ways staying put where we are is part of the current reality. So we're in a time where Enneagram 6 is being evoked for us as a global archetype, maybe.
Yeah.
Then Enneagram 7, this is the point that says too much of a good thing is wonderful. So the archetype that really goes for experiencing life to the fullest and deeply related to the conversation between freedom and my freedom being taken away from me, slavery in some way. So many Enneagram 7s I've worked with have these deep metaphors around being enslaved or imprisoned as being the worst possible kind of job I might have or life I might have. I'm striving for freedom, the possibility to engage with the future and all the options it has and holds for me. So a very future-oriented, possibility, positive in orientation point of the Enneagram, and this deep fear that if I'm not moving, I might get stuck, and particularly first level stuckness, stuck in a boring life. Wow, you know, this is interesting for this time, given that our lives have become so much smaller on the outside, but maybe richer on the inside. But then a deeper fear beyond boredom is often the fear that I'll be stuck in pain from a place that I can't recover. And that's why I have to keep moving towards new, fresh options and ideas that lie in my future. Enneagram 8 is the archetype that says the world is a jungle where only the strong survive. And don't you doubt it. I'm one of the strong ones. Don't mess with me. And we can think of lots of songs that probably in quite a corny way follow from this. I'm a Survivor is the one that came up in my head at this point in time. But this is the archetype that says, I'm going to get the love that I need by being one of the strong ones that protect people that are weaker than me, that put them under my wing. And I'm going to go and meet the challenges of the world, knowing that I have capacity and strength and I can trust my gut. And in doing so, I'm often avoiding my vulnerability and my weakness. So if I'm always being strong and capable, then it's not only hard for others to help me, but it's also really, really hard for me to even associate with some of the more vulnerable parts that we all carry within us. And then lastly, we get to the top of the Enneagram, Enneagram 9, the last of the archetypes. And this is the point in the Enneagram that really holds the archetype of Ubuntu for us, but it's the place of harmony and oneness. The archetype that says, if everyone could just listen to each other, hold back a little bit on our assertiveness and our own needs, and really find what the community needs from us, if we could all create some stability and harmony and rhythm in this communal space, the world would be a better place and we'd all be happier. So there's a deep love of harmony, but a distrust of conflict and turmoil that comes with this point. And so often the Enneagram 9 point gets me to a place where it feels that it's safer to either merge with what other people need or in some way forget my own needs than to really assert what I need into the world, because that creates conflict, and conflict is dangerous and leads to a breakdown in relationship.
Sure. I love that. I love that tour of all the different types. And it reminded me certainly of why I love the Enneagram so much. And just listening to you, particularly reflecting on where we are as a global population around the Enneagram that is now predominant. And also what people keep saying over and over again, that this is an opportunity for humanity to rise. And it almost feels like if we look at it through the lens of the Enneagram, this is an opportunity for us to use the energy of the 9, the motivation of the 9, where we can move towards that oneness and that sense of harmony amongst everybody. And in fact, a lot of people are responding with that, as opposed to responding with the fear of, no, get away, and, me. But there is a sense of, how can we all get together and find a way of supporting each other through this difficult time?
Thank you. That's such a beautiful reflection, and it draws really on the conversation between the kind of anxiety and fear that is evoked by this time that is maybe represented in Enneagram 6, and the line on the symbol to 9, which speaks of that caring for the whole, that sense of Ubuntu, that deep listening to what wants to unfold. And I'd like to just, in the conversation, evoke the line to Enneagram 3 as well, which in many ways represents the fact that whatever happens next, it's going to take a lot of hard work. So 3 in some way says to us, are we ready for this work? Are we ready for all hands on deck, which will be required if we want to not just survive the pandemic, but also recover from it and create something new on the back end of that. But if we tap into Enneagram 3 even deeper, Enneagram 3 is a space that represents holy hope. That space where I also am confronted with the idea that it is worth saving in some way. And that's maybe something that I, at times, confront quite directly for myself. We have to remember that humanity is worth saving. And sometimes I doubt that when we look at things like the extinction, global extinction that we're in terms of what's happening from an environmental perspective, the way in which we treat each other and dehumanize each other in so many ways, the way in which there's so much trauma and pain in the world. It's good to remember that we are worth saving, and that it's worth the hard work that it will take from all of us.
What I appreciate about what you've just done now is to also remind us that whilst it's possible to operate at the less mature level of every Enneagram type, that there is the other side of it, which is a lot more open, a lot more opened and more mature, that isn't only just falling down, but actually it's about, there is something else here that can be worked towards. And in that way, then there isn't a sense of stuckness, but rather that there's always something possible.
I guess I mean, that's a really beautiful reflection. The Enneagram and each archetype represents almost a fluid expression that's possible within us. Both the fallback, the regressed, the immature versions of who I hold within me, and that we all hold within us and ourselves, and the more mature version in many ways. And in the Enneagram, it's almost like those two aspects are what form like a taut string on a violin or a string instrument in some way, where on the one side we have the vice and the downside of each of these, the defensive side of my Enneagram style and type, and on the other side I have the virtue, the holy idea, the more mature expression of myself, and that this is a taut string that is my life. And when I play my string, when my string is attuned and in a conscious space, there's a very different tune that comes from this than when it's not being cared for. And I can either wind it so tightly that it snaps, or also just leave it and it goes completely out of tune. So there is this space of saying, am I tending to the self? That's really important, because as I tend to myself, I can also make a different kind of music with the people around me in many ways.
Absolutely, because I think that one of the challenges that I find is I can focus on my own inner work.
Mm.
What kind of impact, what kind of contribution can I make so that my work doesn't only benefit me, but that we in some way inspire each other to do this work, because we know that what is challenged right now is the collective. It isn't just individuals, but it's all of us together. And what energy we need individually in order to create the collective, the integrated together energy that can help us move to the other side of this and thrive. I like what you said about it's not just about surviving, but it really is about how do we step into bigger versions of ourselves, because those versions are there, even as individuals, as communities, as countries, even. As continents.
Absolutely. And so in this space, there's so much that we need to really take radical responsibility for, including, for example, the metaphors that we use in speaking about what's going on. I'm so aware of so many of the metaphors we're using to describe the pandemic, really placing us in a position of victimhood. So if we're talking about war, or if we're talking about natural disaster and storms, I mean, there's so much of that metaphorically going around. What does that make us? It really, in war, you have victims of war. And then there are some perpetrators, so then you need to go and find the baddies. But in the same, and I think a lot of conspiracy theories and leaders are busy finding baddies at the moment, because the war metaphor requires us to have perpetrators. But then if we look at the natural disaster metaphors, that's also saying that there's something big and scary out there, and we are all victims of that. And we need to wait for this thing to pass, and it's a state of natural disaster, and then we can recover from that. But I do think that there are other really useful metaphors we can work with if we remain conscious of what we do. One of the most beautiful metaphors that makes sense for me is to see this time as, for example, an expression of twasa, or of initiation in some kind of way. This is an opportunity for us to go into another time, and a time of deep teaching and deep connection within us to, and it's a response to actually being sick, in so many ways. And so here, and that's what we're experiencing, the world in some way, the pandemic, the world is sick, but our societies are sick without the pandemic as well. For us to go within and to find and resource ourselves in a much more broad way from, in Enneagram terms, we could say the idea of the holy ideas and the virtues, but more broadly also from global wisdom, from ancestral wisdom, from that part of ourselves that holy hope stems from. And from there come into a new phase of being in the world. And that's really what I think the big question is that is being asked of us is, how will you use this time of initiation? What will you emerge as? What are you willing to give up? Are you willing to leave your old clothes, your old self, your old way of being in the world behind? Or are you just going to put on the clothes of the child after you've come from the mountains?
Yes. You see now, bloody hell, Lucille, is all this conversation that we have, and we're running out of time. But I wanted to ask maybe one or two more questions around the uses of the Enneagram. I know that, we're speaking we're talking about it at a personal level, but I know that they're used also in a variety of other contexts as well. Can you speak a little bit about how Aephoria is using the Enneagram?
Thank you, Makgathi. So, we do use the Enneagram in many different contexts, and the personal leader development context being one of them. But the Enneagram is also incredibly powerful in helping us make sense of what's happening in our families and in our teams and interpersonally. Because my story about how to get the love I need meets your story of how to get the love you need, and therein lies half the problems. and the other half we just don't know about yet. So it can help with interpersonal dynamics, and there's a lot of that tension that's going around. But it can also help us understand approaches to strategy and organizational culture and organizational change. So there's so many applications of that. I also love working with the Enneagram in the space of the kind of transpersonal, in many ways, where the symbol of the Enneagram is used in deeply transformative ways. And we can step onto the symbol to help us find new ways of doing and being. And so if people are interested in finding out more, they can definitely reach out to us and contact us at Aephoria to find out more of how this may be useful.
Wonderful. And it's Aephoria
co.za. Aephoria, Aephoria, Aephoria.co.za. And Aephoria means sustainable human flourishing, which is really what we're most interested in supporting and enabling in the world.
Oh, beautiful. Lucille, oh my goodness. Thank you. Thank you so much for this beautiful time. You're going to say something?
No, I just want to say thank you to you as well, Makgathi. You're such an amazing listener. And I think that is one of the qualities of amazing leaders, is the sense that through the way in which I listen, people realize that there's wisdom within that they didn't necessarily know about before the listener evoked that. So thank you for the way in which you've listened to me today.
Well, and I've so much loved how you kept pulling and pulling and pulling all these wisdoms out from deep within and sharing them with us. I certainly have absolutely expanded in my understanding through this conversation and been inspired. So thank you. Thanks, Lucille.
Big pleasure.
And so please stay tuned for our next conversation at this particular portal. Thank you very much.